What is going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 3 live stream for the Zurich Classic. Also going to talk a little bit about LIV Adelaide, some props I like out there for tonight's action, but just make sure you're ready to go for all of your exposure tomorrow, whether it's for DFS, props, you name it. We'll talk about it all down in chat, as well as any of your live questions. So this will be a little bit of a quicker one. Just go quickly through what you need to know for tomorrow. I know it's a little bit of a lower volume day. A lot of people taking this week off, but hey, I know that we still have some tryhards out there, right, that want to go out there, get that info for Saturday. And there's still some DFS contests that have our name on it. So I'll be playing quite a bit out there for the round 3 showdown. But I would say a little bit of a less good slate. I don't think you have quite as big as an edge as what we had out there for today's showdown. Of course, right, today the weather advantage helped us out quite nicely, though I didn't have guys like Xander and Cantlay as featured players in my exposure. I still had plenty of the morning ceiling performances. So the weather advantage worked out quite nicely with some of the guys that were making 4 or 5 birdies in the morning. And afternoon wave was a little bit of carnage, which was great for showdown, right? Outside of Xander and Cantlay, went pretty sideways for a lot of players late. But for my main slate exposure, that wasn't as great. I had a bunch of guys that ended up, going out there choking and missing the cut. But hey, that's PGA DFS for you. So what's going on? Why I win? First one down there in chat. X and Cantlay did look excellent. Hey, it looks good for my outright bet. So I can't complain there, right? My main slate exposure, I felt pretty good about it. So overall, I thought today went pretty well, right? We had some main slate stuff that popped off. We still ended up profiting for showdown. So we really can't complain about it too much. Let's just hop on into this thing. So I'm going to bring up the weather. We're going to start with that. And it's really the talking point out there for Saturday. So if you're not familiar with how the format of this event works, we are going to go from alternate shot back to the best ball format that we had for Thursday. So that's the first order of business. But outside of that, we're also going to get a pretty significant weather change. Now for Friday, we did have some winds that kicked up late. That's why we went out there and tried to take some of the boarding players yesterday. But on Saturday, it's going to be a factor pretty much the entire day. So as early as like 9, 10 a.m., you can see those sustained winds and the wind gusts really kick up. And for the entire day, we're dealing with like 25-mile-an-hour wind gusts. So it's the best ball format. They're still going to go out there and score, right? Your top tier scorers are going to get like 80, 90 fantasy points at the very least, but maybe it's not going to be as good of scoring conditions as what we had for Thursday. So when we get props on Prize Picks, it's going to be a little bit more important for that stage. But in terms of what we're looking at for the showdown format, it does limit some of our success here, right? If this wind was coming in around like noon, right, the edge for taking those morning players would probably be there, right, if they had calm conditions for 3-4 hours. But there's no defined waves, right? We're to round 3, only 40 teams ended up making the cut. So the tee times are going to be between, I think it's 7:15 local time and then 11:15 local time. So it is like a 4, maybe 4.5 hour spread that we have for those tee times. But you can see about 2 hours in, right, is when we get the wind speeds kicking up. So I think that if you take some of the super early starters, the guys that just hardly made the cut at -8, you might see slightly better conditions than what you get for the guys later on. But remember that a lot of your elite tier groups, just the best players in this field, right, are in some of the later groups. So you probably can't just only go and play some of those early starters. So that's why I, mentioned that I thought that round 2 is probably a better showdown slate than what we're going to have for today. And it's not just the weather that we had out there for today's action, but also the ownership perspective. Because there's only 40 players that made the cut, it does really condense ownership when you're going out there and looking at projections. So it's going to be really tough to go out there and make unique lineups. So we're going to talk about ways that you can kind of hack that, right? Go out there and still get different to the field, even if you are taking some guys at higher ownership. But it's definitely a little bit of a wonky slate. So, hey, we're going to go through this quickly. I'm going to give you guys the information that you need and try not to waste any time. So in terms of our tee times, this is an Eastern, so it's 1 hour behind. Right, so they're teeing off at like 7:14 local time. Your last tee time's here at 12:35 Eastern. So that'll be 11:35 over there on the Central Time Zone. So like I said, about a 4-hour difference in tee times that we're dealing with, just a little bit over 4 hours, which is why I don't think we're going to see that massive weather edge. So, I'd like to sit here and tell you that we're going to have a big edge on tomorrow's slate, but frankly, that's just not what I see. I'm out there with the forecast. So I'm keeping my exposure for round 3 pretty light. I'm not going to be going crazy out there on my showdown lineups. But hey, if you like this kind of slate, if you want to go out there and play a bunch of chalk, then be my guest, right? Go out there and play a bunch. Let's see what's going on down there in the chat. We have Fitzer says the weather AM. Yeah, the AM guys went off today, right? I mean, there were a few stinkers. You're going to get that. But in general, they were playing a pretty reasonable golf course. Those later guys with those wins, it got pretty nasty out there. So I didn't get to see a lot of the golf. I actually played myself today, went out there with a few buddies, was able to catch the last like 2.5 hours of play, and even chip shots that they were hitting downwind. We're having a really hard time stopping. The one that really stands out to me was Cantlay and Xander when they were playing on hole, I think it was 13, the one that is slightly drivable, the one where they hit it up actually past the green off the tee. The chip shot that Cantlay hit it looks horrible, right? It went like 25, 30 feet past the hole, but it's all because of that was playing downwind. So yeah, the weather today definitely went our way. And unfortunately, though, I don't see that happening tomorrow, right? It just kicks up a little bit too early. So enough talking crap about the slate, right? How are we going to play this thing, right? If you're going out there and you're playing Showdown for tomorrow, there's a few things that you have to know, right? First off, the tee times that we just went through, right? There's not really a big spread when it comes to your first and last tee time. The other thing is this ownership angle. And because there's only 40 teams that we can choose, it is extremely bunched. And if you're a part of the Patreon, you have the version of this where you can see all the ownership numbers. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Down here in the 6K range, you have guys that are like 10, 12% owned, and they're not even like mega chalky compared to the rest of the range. Your true pivots down here, right, would be like a Brandon Wu, a James Nicklaus group, right down there at $6,100. And they're still carrying like 3-4% ownership out there for the large field GBPs. So the reason why I don't like this slate as much, and again, I'm just trying to be honest about that, is because even your pivots, right, even the guys that you're taking a shot on, right, that are out of form, that are just lower tier teams out there in this field, you're getting it like 5 to 10%, right? If you're mixing that in with these 20, 25%ers up there towards the top end of the board, first off, you might run into duplicates, which is, the number one thing you want to avoid when going out there and building GPP lineups, but you're also going to have a really hard time getting leverage. So it's a slate where I think some of the chalk is necessary too. Like a Cantlay and Schauffele up top. Like I feel like you have to play them in at least some of your lineups out there for tomorrow. Like especially after how they played today, right? They looked unstoppable out there. There are a lot of other chalky plays that I think make sense. Like these two Canadian groups, right? I think that they're solid targets, but they're like 25, 30% owned themselves. Down here in the 8K range, anyone with a pulse is like 20, 25% themselves. So at a certain point, you're just going to have to take chalk, is essentially what I'm telling you, right? There's only 40 players. Pretty much everyone's chalky to begin with. It's going to be all about lineup construction, right? It's going to be trying to find a way to spend your salary that is different than what other people are going to do. The other aspect of that, right, is potentially leaving salary on the table. Another way to do it would be to maybe go out there, take, 2-3 chalky players, but really take pivots for those last 3, like go overboard when it comes to the game theory. If you're going to just go out there and try and do it with player selection, right, good old game theory, to go out there and get different, you're going to have to really push that envelope, right? Like even a Colin Morikawa, Kitayama, who are the lowest owned option up there in the 10Ks, are still 20% owned, right? Just to give you perspective on how hard it is to get that leverage, right? Garnett and Straka not playing well, $8,900, relatively overpriced, you could say, for players of their caliber, are still 15% owned. Nick Hardy, Davis Riley hardly made the cut. They are still 15% owned. And Peter Monotti, Russell Knox, right? They made the cut on the number. I've still got them at 8.5% ownership. And believe it or not, they're actually one of the lower owned plays down here at the top end of the 6K range. So it's tough to go out there and just say that you're going to take guys that are going off early and make that how you're getting different. Because even if you do that, right, and you take all these guys that are -8, -9, that are going to get marginally better conditions. Like I don't hate that narrative, right? Taking a bunch of guys that are going off early, even that is not going to give you the leverage that you're looking for. So, before building lineups out here, know that you're going to have to really get nasty about it if you want to play that game theory edge, or the alternative, right? And I'm still playing some chalk. So I'm playing, a Cantlay Schauffele. You can see that over here on the spreadsheet, right? I'm playing one of these 2 Canadian groups. I'm playing a few of the chalky guys down here in the 8K range. It's how I'm putting that, lineup together, right? So I have a few ways that I'm doing it. So first off would be the studs and duds. I don't think a ton of people, right, are going to take 2 groups up here in the 10K range. And the other would be to be extremely balanced about it. Would be to like just hammer this 8, 9K range down here. I think if you go to one extreme or the other, you're going to find slightly less utilization. So even if you're taking guys that are at higher ownership numbers, so obviously if you're going studs and duds, you're going to have to go down into the 6K range. Normally these 6K guys are like 1-2% owned. I'm out there on Showdown, but because they're going to be like 5 to 10% out here on this kind of slate, you might think that you're not getting that much leverage down there in the 6Ks, but because you're going double spend up, maybe double pay down right down here in the 6s, that lineup construction difference might be enough to go out there and get you different to the rest of the field. So I think you have to think about the slate a little bit differently. I think you have to put in a little bit more work to go out there and get that leverage, which is personally why I'm going a little bit later on this slate. I think that it's a lot of work. It's a lot of, randomness when you have a best ball format to begin with, right? It's one thing to have a hard time finding an edge. The other part of it is that it's best ball and there's a lot of variance and a lot that it's out of your control when it comes to the scoring. Like, for example, what if you're two guys up top? Let's say that you really like a Pendrith Nick Taylor. I think they're a pretty good play out there for tomorrow. Sorry, I just named two guys from two different groups. Sorry, Nick Taylor and Adam Hadwin, I meant to say. Right down there at $9,300. What if Nick Taylor and Hadwin make birdies on like the same 5 holes, right? Maybe it's like all the par 5s that they're scoring on, right? They can't make a birdie for their life. Over there on the longer par 4s, even an elite tier group like this could fall victim to the lack of being able to ham and egg, right? The lack of having birdies on separate holes out there, which is why it's also a hard slate to want to put a bunch of money behind. So that's what I'll say about that. In terms of plays that I like, there are going to be some chalky guys that I'm taking, right? Like, just to give you an idea, I'm playing Nick Taylor and Adam Hadwin, if you couldn't tell at this point, right? I'm playing a Cantlay Schauffele. Down here in the 8K range, like I like a Keith Mitchell, Joel Damon, and they're getting quite a bit of ownership out there, right? If I'm going to take players like that, I need to leave salary on the table. I might need to leave $500 to $1,000 on the table. I may need to go down here and change it up with lineup construction, right? So in lineups where I'm taking a chalky Xander and Schauffele up here, Xander, Schauffele, and Patrick Cantlay, right? A lot of times my second man in is going to be this Colin Morikawa, Kurt Kitayama group, right? To go out there and offset some of that ownership. It's a slate where, again, it's a lot of moving parts. It's an extremely annoying slate, if I'm going to be completely honest. But if you're willing to get wacky with your lineup construction or your salary, I think you can get that differentiation that you need. I like a Garnett. Straka has a little bit of leverage also, guys that I think just make a lot of birdies. So you got to like them for the best ball format. Garrett Kiggle, Ryan Fox, same thing, just high birdie percentage players, very aggressive players that can take care of some of the longer holes. They're still getting some ownership, but you kind of have to deal with that out there in this slate. Nick Hardy, Davis Riley, I'm taking as last year's champions. They really killed this best ball format. So now that they're actually one of the lower owned guys in this range, I'll take a shot on them out there for the Showdown format. So again, this 14.9%, I know it doesn't look like low ownership, but comparatively, right, if you saw my Patreon projections, you would get an idea for why I'm calling them a low owned play. And then for the last guys we'll go through, it's Peter Malnati and Russell Knox. They're players that just modeled well for this golf course. So I like them heading into the week. They've got the early tee time, relatively low ownership because they just hardly went out there and made the cut. And in best ball, I have to say Malnati is really good for birdie production. He's a relatively high birdie or better percentage player, not so much with Russell Knox. So there is that one slight negative when it comes to playing that group. But like a lot of the groups that are out there, they're going to have some negatives, right? When you have two players to work with, it's a lower tier field like this. You're going to have things that you don't love about the pairings that you're taking. So I would just recommend getting a little bit greasy about it, right? Mixing in some players that you probably aren't all that comfortable taking. Because if not, right, like for example, a Zach Johnson, a Ryan Palmer are like 20% owned. They're like 15 to 20% owned out there in GPPs. That is absolutely bonkers. A Harry Hall, a Scott Piercy, right, are like 15% plus owned themselves. Like if you're going to take anyone with a pulse, like anyone that's played well over the first 2 days, you're going to pay for it when it comes to the ownership perspective. So that's what I'll say about Showdown. We're not going to spend that much more time on the player pool aspect. What I want to more so go through is actually building a few lineups because I did a lot of yapping, right, talking about what you can do to get different. It's probably easier to just show you, right, how I'm going out there and thinking through some of the differentiation. Let's see what's going on. What did I shoot today? So not very good, James. I shot something in the high 80s. I stopped taking score for the last few holes. I shot a 44 in the front, which not great. It's well worse than what I'm used to playing, but I haven't been playing very much. So I'm definitely not even close to what my handicap is right now. It's a tough golf course, but yeah, high 80s. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if I was into the 90s. So it was not one of my better days, but I had a lot of really good golf shots. So I was kind of joking to my buddies saying that I was playing a lot better than the scorecard. And they agreed emphatically with me, right? Usually my buddies like to give me some shit, as any good set of buddies is going to do out there. But they actually agreed with me when I said that. They're like, yeah, you're right. You actually are playing a lot better than your score. Well, that's how golf goes sometimes. And hey, with best ball, tomorrow these guys playing in pairings, that is even more so possible, right? If you just end up making all your birdies on the same hole, like you could be playing a whole lot better than the scorecard, a whole lot better than other groups out there, and it might not matter. So golf's a cruel game. It's a cruel game when you're playing it with the normal rules, let alone what you have here with the best ball format side. So that's all I've got for DFS, guys. We're going to build a few lineups here, like I said, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how to actually think through some of your builds. So the first thing you got to think of here is, and I think before you even start clicking players, is pick how you're going to get different, right? If you're going to take some chalk, you got to start thinking about how you're going to do it with either salary or with lineup construction. If you're just going to take all early players, right, and try and do it with player selection, then commit to that beforehand, right? This isn't the kind of slate where you can kind of click in like 3 players and then decide where you're going to get different. It is such a wonky slate. You just have so little players to choose from that you kind of have to make up your mind beforehand. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do it with both kind of strategies. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do it with taking some of the chalkier players and maybe leaving that salary on the table or going out there and changing it up with lineup construction. So in terms of leaving salary on the table, right, if you're going to take a Cantlay Schauffele group right up there towards the top, it's going to be a lot harder to leave salary on the table, right? Because you're already spending $11,400 in one spot. So if you go up here and you want to mix in, let's say, the Morikawa Kitayama group, right, as your second man in, that becomes an even harder thing to accomplish. So if I'm going to take those chalky 2 players up top, maybe my second man is a little bit cheaper, right? If I'm going to try and leave that salary on the table. So maybe this is where I go to that Nick Taylor group right out there with Adam Hadwin. My third man in, I probably try and go a little bit cheaper too, right? To also try and avoid just having to take like all 6K guys right out there with my last 3 or 4 spots. So we'll go down here. We'll throw in Higo and Fox, right? I think they're a pretty good pairing out there for Saturday. Down here in the 7K range, again, not trying to use all of my salary. So I'm maybe going a little bit lower than what I normally would for my 4th man in. This is where maybe you can pretty much play whoever you want here too, right? So even if you want to take some chalk down here in the 7K range, if we're going to leave like $1,000 on the table, that's totally fine. So let's go down here to $7,000. Let's throw in Zach Johnson, Ryan Palmer. I'm not using them in my lineups tomorrow, but it really doesn't matter who we're clicking here, right? We're not building a lineup for you guys to tail or to go out there and play yourselves. It's more so, right, to show you what I'm thinking about. We're here at $7,200. So again, we've got to stay below that number if we're going to leave that salary on the table. Maybe you throw in the Malnati Knox group, right, that I was mentioning before. So here we've got pretty chalky Cantlay group, right? Pretty chalky Canadian group as our second man in. Higo, Johnson, right, are all going to be getting ownership, probably 15% apiece between those 2 groups. So for our last man in here, we're not only going to want to take somebody that's cheaper, right, to leave that salary, but probably an ownership pivot as well. So rather than going down here and taking, let's see, like a Meissner Smotherman that are getting some attention, or maybe even going up here and taking, let's see, like we could leave a little bit of salary, right, and take an Echeverria Grazerman. We could take a Kazire Coles, right, and still be leaving $300 on the table. I probably would want to push the envelope even a little bit more than that. So I would go down here to at least like a Trainer Ramey, right? You could use them as your last man in. That would be leaving $500. Also taking a relatively low-owned player, or even going down here and potentially adding in a Meissner or Smotherman, leaving $800 on the table. You go a little bit cheaper than that and add a Stevens Barjon right down there at -10. This is what I would be looking to do if I was going out there and playing in large field GPPs. So again, I'm keeping my ownership very light. I'm going to have lineups that take some chalk that have to be a little bit more creative with where I'm spending my salary. The other way to go about this, right? Maybe not leaving all that salary on the table. Maybe you're somebody that wants to really maximize your salary, right? Doesn't want to leave $1,000 out of hand. Then I think you might want to double spend up, right? So I mentioned the other way of getting different with taking the chalk would be to go out there and change up your lineup construction. And an easy way to do that would be to spend up more than what other people are going to do. So by taking these 2 top groups, maybe even mixing in like a Sepp Straka, who's also maybe a little bit overpriced at $8,900, now it forces you to get really ugly about it, right? It forces you down here to the bottom end of the 6s. This is where I don't love a group like Fishburne, Blair, right? Especially because they're getting some ownership. Maybe even throw in like a Brandon Wu and James Nicklaus, right, as down here in the 6K range. It forces you to take some super ugly plays, but it's best ball. You're going to have some of these really shitty groups still go out there and shoot like 6, 7 under par. So if you can get different lineup construction wise, you can save some salary, right? By taking a player like that, why not do it rather than leaving that salary on the table, right? Just be even more aggressive about it. So you can take Brandon Wu down there. Maybe we add another pivot down here towards the bottom. So maybe that's a Reeve Snedeker group, right? Who's low owned and going to save you that salary. Now by taking a double punt, right? By taking a double spend up here, maybe you can make this a unique lineup out there in the large field GPP. Now, it's not a guarantee, right, that these specific players are going to end up being unique. But by going out there and not taking that balanced approach where it's like 10K, 9K, 8K, right? And then 2 7s and maybe a 6 to round out your lineup, by changing it up a little bit, like we're fading most of the 7K range, right? By taking this kind of lineup, that could be a way to go out there and get that leverage to the field. So it's not my favorite slate. That's really all I've got when it comes to the DFS side. But still going to talk through some prop stuff here in a second because I do like a few of the props over there for the live side. Sorry you're late, but who's a pairing that didn't do great today that I like for tomorrow? So in terms of a bounce back, I don't even know if you could call it a bounce back, but I mean, yeah, honestly, none of these guys played horribly, right? Because you had to shoot like even par -1 to go out there and make the cut. I guess Garnett, Straka, like they played pretty well. I think they shot like 2, 3 under par on the day. So yeah, that's a tough one, man. There really aren't that many people that made the cut that played horribly. Like if you shot over par, I mean, unless you ended up 11 under par over the first day, right? You missed the cut. Off the top of my head, the only group that really accomplished that was, let me see, this Lashley Campos group, right? They were, I think, -10 after the first day. They're one of the only groups in the field that shot over par and ended up making it to the weekend. So there's not really that sort of player to give you, right? That shot over par that can go ahead and turn it around. But if you're looking for a low-owned player, right, maybe that's what you're looking for there. Maybe it's more Kawa and Kurt Kitayama, right? Like I know 20% doesn't look like a low ownership number, but in comparison to this Irish group, the All-American group up top, they are coming in at lower ownership. So yeah, that's a tough one for this slate. It's yeah, a lot of those guys missed the cut, to be frank with you. So all right, let's go through this now. So what I'm going to do is first off, see if they posted any PGA stuff, which it doesn't look like Prize Picks has that up, but let me refresh this, see if they have it up. So yeah, nothing over there for Prize Picks yet. What we're going to do is go through the LIV Golf. So this will be super quick. Yesterday, scoring was super easy, right? We expected that. And if anything, the weather out here for today's action, which will be for tonight, right, over here in the United States, is even better. So if we take a look at these forecasts, they're calling for sub 5 mile an hour winds. GFS, sub 6 miles an hour the entire day. Icon, sub 5. Meteo Blue, you're going to get the point, right? All of these forecasts are calling for next to no wind, right? This one over here for Saturday, right, is calling for sub 10 miles an hour. Access model here is calling for sub 6. Yesterday in the afternoon, they had 10, 15 miles an hour of wind. And if you took a look at the scoring averages, which let me bring up Data Golf real quick. They do have the live scoring for LIV over there, which, by the way, LIV Golf starts in 45 minutes. So if you're going to enter these, make sure to do it soon so you don't miss out on that. If you're watching this on replay, you unfortunately probably already missed out on some of these LIV props, but it played 2.61 under par. But if you were tracking this as the round went on, I stayed up and watched the golf last night. I told you guys, right? I had my coffee. I was going to stay up all night and do that. It was 3.5 under par for at least the first 4 hours of play. In fact, they said on the broadcast that the scoring for the first 9 holes of every player in the field was the lowest in LIV Tour history. So there was a round last year at this specific event where the scoring average was 3.7 under par. They were on par for that kind of scoring, if not better, out there for yesterday's action. So when the wind kicked up, you saw this come back down to earth, right? It actually got almost nearly a stroke harder by the time they got to the end of the round. But with no wind today, right? There's no wind out there. There's also moving day pin locations, moving day tee boxes that they might end up moving up for the field. This course is going to get absolutely roasted. So I don't have this on the actual golf course. I guess it went back to Adelaide over there. So let me go ahead and actually click this on the Grange golf course. But you see, it doesn't change the forecast, right? It's still just as calm over there, like 1.5 miles away. This golf course is going to get absolutely roasted. So this 2.6 under par scoring average, I actually think is going to get even better out there for tonight. And the birdie average, if you go through and add it up for the 18 holes, was 5.09 per round, right? What is it? Just over 5 birdies per round, right? Is unheard of, right? We never see that, right? Century Tournament of Champions, sometimes it's like 4.8 per round. Sometimes it is like 5 per round over there at the Century. If it's going to get even easier, right? And imagine if the wind hadn't kicked up yesterday, birdie average would have been like 5.5, 6 per round. So like this is a golf course that is just ungodly easy. It is way too easy for professional golfers to be playing on it. You've got next to no wind, the moving day setup. It makes me think that you're going to see an absolute metric fuck ton of scoring. Like there's no way for me to put it into perspective other than the kind of scoring that we're likely to see today will be unmatched. We probably won't ever see it again. So in terms of the players that I'm going to take, it's going to be some wild lines, right? Like there are some guys at 5.5 birdies I'm taking for overs, even guys at 4.5 birdies that you would never think you'd want to take an over on. But because of the scoring average, I truly think we might see a 5.5 birdie average for the field. You know, somebody like Cam Smith, for example, right, who's at 5.5 birdies. If I think that's going to be the field average, then this is an absolute steal, right, at that same sort of number. So that's why I'm so bullish about these live props. So if you've stayed for this long time, you're going to get a bunch of them that I entered because I went absolutely ham out here for tonight. All right, so let's do that one. And then a pairing that you can go with for that is I took it with Mark Leishman. So obviously it's the two Aussies together. That is just a little silly narrative, right? Taking it out there in the same prop combo. But Mark Leishman, first off, played really well round one. He's at 4.5 birdies, which is actually 0.5 lower than what you had for the round one average. And coming into this live event was a player that was gaining strokes in 2024 to the field. So he's an above average player. You've seen him have some of his best results over the last 2-3 starts over there on the LIV Tour. And that's not just for this year. That's actually for all time over there in LIV. He's been a lot better lately than what we're used to seeing. So for him to be lower than that tour average, like lower than that field average for round one is, I think, a mistake, right? And if I think conditions might get better out there for today, which is, it's crazy. It's a crazy thought, but it's true. Like weather looks better, pins should be easier, then somebody like Leishman should be at 5, maybe even 5.5 birdies right out there for today. So for just for perspective, I have guys like Cam Smith, other elite tier players like a Neiman, Bryson, Brooks, DJ, all those sort of players projected for over 6 birdies, right? Close to 6.25 to maybe even 6.5 per round, depending on the player that it is. And like a Cam Smith, who finished at the top 5 of this event last year, played pretty well at the Masters, looked really good out there for round one, is the kind of player I'd project for the closer to the 6.5 mark. So there, those two are props that you can take. Right? I mentioned Joaquin Neiman. I even mentioned Bryson, right, as a player that I was taking a look at. Where is Bryson on here? So there he is over there at 5.5 birdies. Like I know this seems like a steep projection, right? It normally would be, right, for a normal golf course. This is not a normal golf course. This is one that is going to get absolutely torched out there. And those are some of the spots that I would keep an eye on over there. In terms of prize picks, you do have some stuff posted over here, but not all the same props. So I actually like this under on Jon Rahm strokes. So they do have them at the same number in Underdog if you want to go out there and take that. But like I mentioned Brooks before, right? I mentioned DJ as a potential spot to take an over. Again, 5.5 looks like a high number, but when the field average is going to be 5 and players like Brooks, DJ average at least a half a birdie, if not an entire birdie more per round to the rest of the field, that's where they would go out there and be pretty excellent value. So you can see there that would pay 4.75x, which is pretty decent out there for the 3-leg combo. So I had a 4-leg combo that I took, one other player, which, you know, I can't give you guys every single prop that I'm taking because I have to keep some of that over there on the Patreon page. But hopefully it gives you an idea of how I'm attacking this golf course. I've got 5 slips in over here on Underdog. I do have 1 slip. It's a 4-man in over here on Prize Picks. And that's what I'm going with. So that locks in 45 minutes. Again, if you're watching this on replay, if you're watching this just after I went live, you might be able to catch them right in that time frame, but it locks in 45 minutes. So I just wanted to touch on that for anyone that was here live because I think they're really solid props. That's for damn sure. So let me see. Let me refresh this one more time, see if they posted anything for the Zurich and whatnot. If not, I'm going to hop on out of here. And frankly, I entered 1 slip out there for the Zurich. It was actually the one that we went over there on the live stream, and I entered nothing else for the Zurich. It's an absolute shit show. If you couldn't tell by me going through some of the stuff before, it's just not my favorite kind of slate. So I'm sticking away from it for the most part. And honestly, and I'm playing other sports this weekend. We've got NFL draft going on right now. We've got NBA playoffs, which I used to be really big into NBA. I used to have a bunch of takedowns. I have a 100K takedown in NBA. I have a 50K takedown in NBA, multiple second place finishes for 20, 25K over there on the NBA side. But that was before I started doing the full-time content for golf. So that's something that's kind of dwindled for me. But now that we have, shitty golf event this weekend over here for PGA, I've been looking a lot more at that. And you know who's been really helpful out there from that perspective? Ship It Nation has. They're, of course, the sponsor of this live stream that I mentioned off the bat. They cover a variety of different sports when it comes to your fantasy projections. So for somebody like myself that maybe hasn't been as invested on the golf this weekend, I'm still doing all the content, of course, but again, watching more of these other sports because it's a lot more captivating. I've been using their projections for all of my process. So I have my own optimizer for NBA, had to fire that back up. I even have one out there for MLB that I made way back in the day. So what I did is I took the projections from over there at Ship It, right? Uploaded that into my optimizer and then just worked my magic from there, right? Played my game theory, went out there and played a few lineups. Last night for NBA, entered 5 lineups, cashed 4 of them. So I'd say the Ship It Nation stuff is off to a pretty good start when it comes to the NBA stuff. But I'm going to try out NFL when that comes around. I haven't been a part of Ship It Nation when they had the NFL stuff before, but they come in clutch for a weekend like this. So the sponsor of these live streams, they make it possible for us to bring you guys this content slate in, slate out. And make sure to use the code Luke15 at checkout if you guys are joining over there for a discount off any membership that you're getting. So that'll count for anything but a weekly membership. They do weekly memberships, but you can't get a discount on that kind of subscription. But for anything that is a month or longer, so a month or one of their annual subscriptions, that code Luke15 will get you that discount. So that's all I've got for this live stream, though, guys. Wanted to do our little plug at the end before we hopped on out of here. That's all I've got for the round 3 live stream. Going to be watching some LIV Golf tonight. Going to be sweating out some of my lineups out there for DFS. I've got some NBA prop slips in. I think we got, a couple lineups that were in the cache of NBA DFS tonight. So I'll have to keep an eye on all of that. But best of luck out there with all the exposure that you're getting to. And we'll be running this back out for round 4 as well. So I know round 4 Showdown, right? It's not going to be great either. Let's be frank, right? Round 3 Showdowns kind of sucks for this week. Round 4 Showdown's probably going to be the same, but we are going to have game theory to work with, right? Because it's a team format. I think you're still going to see a lot of people taking the guys at the top. So maybe ownership will be a little bit more spread out, right? Maybe it'll be the chalky guys will be like 50% owned this time around. If we get that kind of slate where like Xander Cantlay or Rory Shane Lowry are like 50, 60% owned, you could probably find an edge out there for that. So we're going to be covering that, of course, out there tomorrow. Props out there for this event and out there for LIV. So make sure you're tuned in for that. That's all I've got, guys. Best of luck out there with that exposure, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.